Khevsureti, a land of myths and legends, a region whose inhabitants once guarded the northern borders of the unified kingdom of Georgia. This region was one of the most impenetrable and well-defended fortresses in the Greater Caucasus Mountains. The village of Mutso is a central link in this long chain of fortifications, a defensive complex at 1,900 meters above sea level in the northern part of Khevsureti. And it still impresses visitors to this day. After the abolition of the Georgian monarchy at the beginning of the 19th century, Mutso lost its military and defensive function. In the 20th century, after Georgia was incorporated into the Soviet Union, Mutso residents, together with other local Khevsurs, were evicted from their homes. The process of resettlement began in 1956 and continued for almost 25 years, coming to an end only in the 1980s. It's so painful to recall. Mutso was completely emptied of people. My uncle was the last one to leave. After my family moved, I kept coming here in my dreams. I started the first semester of the second year at school in Mutso. Then my family decided to move to the lowlands. According to the census of 1926, 31 households, or 148 inhabitants, lived in Mutso. In 50 years, Mutso became a deserted, lifeless territory, devoid of its population. This fortified village, without its native inhabitants, was faced with the threat of being wiped from the map completely. If we look at photos of Mutso from 30 years ago and pictures from just before the rehabilitation works, we can see that during this period, half of the village collapsed. Mutso was on the verge of disappearing completely. Within a few more years, only a few ruins would have remained. Even the one inhabitant who returned to Mutso was unable to stop the houses and towers from falling apart. His return failed to change the fortunes of this dying village. I came back and no one, neither my brother nor my parents, nobody believed that I would stay here. They said I'd stay for 1 year, 2 years, maybe 3 years. Just as Mutso was about to disappear entirely, the Georgian government made the decision to restore this historical fortified village. The fact that there was one person living in this ruined and abandoned village and was constantly trying to protect it was a significant motivation for us. Mutso is built on 3 terraces. The only path, leading to the houses and towers, follows the 45-degree slope of the cliff. The first restorers appeared here in 2014. When I walked along this path for the first time, I realized that we were starting something crazy. How can I forget that day? I've never experienced such joy in my life. It was a miracle. One day you wake up and a company comes and says they're starting construction. All of a sudden lorries came, workers came, they set up tents. I wondered what was going on. Preparatory works took almost a year. The inventorization of the village's various structures was started, and individual rehabilitation plans were developed. Those structures that had disappeared were the ones to be restored first on paper and then revitalized. When I first came here, it was night and I couldn't see anything. In the morning, I came outside and saw such incredible buildings and structures. The piles of disintegrated slabs were unsalvageable for construction, so the first thing the builders did was remove debris from the village. The construction of 14-meter-high towers on a plot measuring only 3 or 4 square meters required special skill. Nevertheless, the biggest challenge for the builders was the difficult terrain of the village. The mountain is terraced artificially. That's to say, in the place where they used to cut slate, that same slate was then used for construction. We didn't have the luxury of doing that, so we had to transport materials from elsewhere and then deliver them to the site. A 300-meter-long ropeway was installed at a height of 200 meters along the Mutso cliff. This ropeway made it possible to carry on construction uninterrupted. The method of construction was another challenge. From the very beginning, everybody understood that sand, cement, iron and water couldn't be used. Unfortunately, the dry masonry method of construction had been lost, and we were in a difficult situation. Dry masonry has its own techniques and requires special knowledge. So in the first stage, we brought over craftsmen from Dagestan, who were both working and teaching locals. Some of the first houses were built like this. Each stone has to be put on the wall without mortar and then stabilized so that it doesn't move. It means that each stone requires a lot of attention and effort, so that tall towers, when they're built, will be stable enough to stand alone. All of these details have to be taken into consideration. The restoration of the last tower in Mutso has come to an end, and the first fruits of the rehabilitation work have already appeared. The first lamps are being lit next door to the village's sole guardian. My brother Eldar Dayauri has also returned. The other, younger brother, has set up a guest house. Many more people will come. When there are tourists, people will come here, and some of them will have guest houses. Others will have shops, cafes, and they'll have an income. I'm planning to restore the house of my ancestors. I'll set up a guest house in this building, and my ultimate goal is to move back to Mutso and live here. I can supply milk, cheese, butter, honey. People are coming back to the mountains, and that's the most important thing. That our activities are not just the restoration of historical monuments. Life has come back. Mutso has been revived. It's so good. Compare living alone in the village to when other people are around and you can communicate. After 5 years, one restoration project, which was started in 2014, has become a model of development, not just for Mutso, but for the entire region. Currently, only 3 families live in Mutso. However, the hydropower plant and communication infrastructure creates conditions for this once damaged, disrupted and ruined village to come back to life and be repopulated. This was the last chance we had before the village became totally depopulated. I mean it, things can be restored after 10, 20 or 30 years, but once the buildings are completely derelict, coming back to the village is impossible. This is very important for me. We were lucky. With God's help, anything can come back to life.